Thank you. I'm Ed Neilan. I'm the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer at NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders. And my topic today is to discuss one of NORD's newest programs, the NORD Rare Disease Centers of Excellence program. Here's my slide on contributions to the rare disease research. As I said, I'm the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer at NORD. I have the pleasure of overseeing our IAMRARE registry platform, which currently houses rare disease registries and patient-focused natural history studies for more than 30 different rare diseases. I'm also an investigator on some FDA-funded research grants involving data sharing, clinical outcome assessment creation, and an innovative natural history study where the patients don't have to visit a medical center at all to participate. It's all done from home. I will speak about the Centers of Excellence today. I'll also just mention in this context that I'm serving now also as the co-chair of the clinical subteam of the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium, which is working to move forward 8 first-in-human AAV gene therapy trials in very rare diseases. Here are some of my disclosures. I own some stock in Sanofi Genzyme, where I used to work. I've also consulted in the past couple of years for a few of the pharmaceutical companies. And I work part-time still at Boston Children's Hospital, where I've actually spent most of my career. Currently, I'm seeing patients there once a month. This slide is NORD's mission statement. We strive to improve the health and well-being of people with rare diseases by driving advances in care, research, and policy. NORD just celebrated its 40th anniversary a few months ago. The origins of NORD were in patient advocates who saw the absence of drug development essentially for rare diseases and led the creation of the Orphan Drug Act. Since that time, NORD has a history of pushing the envelope or innovating in a few different ways. NORD started the first rare disease patient assistance program in 1987, and our patient services department is still the largest department within NORD. In the early 2000s, NORD and other organizations advocated strenuously with the government for the creation of additional programs focused on rare diseases, including the Office of Rare Disease Research at NIH, the Office of Orphan Products at FDA, and the creation of the Rare Disease Clinical Research Networks and clinicaltrials.gov. In 2014, NORD launched its IAMRARE registry and natural history study platform. And as I mentioned, it's currently home to more than 30 disease-specific registries and patient-focused natural history studies. The Centers of Excellence, the topic for today, is NORD's most ambitious new program. We announced the designation of the first centers in November of 2021 and held the first meeting of newly selected center directors in 2022. This year, in 2023, we added 9 additional centers so that there are now 40, and we've gotten further into the organization of the network and the beginnings of programs that the network will facilitate. Despite all the progress that has been made since the Orphan Drug Act to bring new treatments to rare diseases, there's still quite a bit of unmet need. The exact number of rare diseases is hard to estimate, but with questions about what you lump together and what you split apart. But there may be as many as 10,000 rare diseases. And it's believed that rare diseases affect close to 1 in every 10 Americans, or 25 to 30 million Americans. Yet it still takes an average of about 6 years in the United States, and the numbers are similar also in Europe, despite the advantages of a more logical medical system in Europe, for the average patient to get their rare disease diagnosis. And we know many patients never receive the right diagnosis. Of course, I'm sort of speaking to the converted here in the newborn screening context, since that's an effort to make sure that at least some patients have, almost zero diagnostic odyssey. But for most rare disease patients, it's a hit or miss, drawn out process to get the right diagnosis. And then 95% of rare diseases still don't have an FDA approved treatment. Furthermore, as I continue to outline some of the challenges that rare disease patients face. Unlike more common conditions, rare diseases have little in the way of standards of care, treatment guidelines, awareness by patients or physicians. There are experts in rare diseases, but they tend to be sort of few and scattered. There's relatively little funding and research and development for rare diseases, despite incentives built into the Orphan Drug Act and so forth. And there's also relatively little, oftentimes, in terms of educational resources or community support for rare diseases. NORD maintains a list of something like 1,200 rare disease patient organizations, and more than 300 of those organizations have chosen to be NORD member organizations. But with 10,000 rare diseases, you'll see there are many diseases that don't even have a patient organization, at least not one that we're aware of. So the Centers of Excellence is an attempt to add more than our efforts in policy and education and research that NORD itself can administer by partnering with expert medical centers distributed across the United States. The goal is to try to place rare disease patient care and research and development more at the forefront of America's healthcare system. With this, the first and largest network of US medical institutions and experts dedicated to both patient care and research, and for all rare diseases. Now, saying that, I should point out that we don't intend to, and actually will strive actively to avoid competing with resources that exist. But again, with 10,000 rare diseases, there are many diseases for which there are no nationally networked resources of collaboration or centers of excellence for patients. And so that was the inspiration for a new program, believing that we couldn't and no one could stand up 10,000 different networks of centers of excellence. Why not build the infrastructure to share expertise and have a general rare disease center of excellence to fill the gaps? So this is a unique collaboration between NORD and leading medical centers nationwide, devoted, as I said, to all rare diseases and to improving both care and accelerating research. We're not the NIH, we're not very well funded. So our principal operation is collaboration and knowledge sharing. So we're founded on those principles, as well as serving patients closer to where they live. And throughout all the programs, we strive to equitably improve access to care, but also to research studies, since for many rare disease patients, a research study may be their best hope for a truly disease-altering treatment. Benefits that we hope patients will experience from the Centers of Excellence include an ability to search for an appropriate center of expertise across the designated network, access to medical homes for consistent and high-quality clinical care amongst clinicians who are well-informed about their condition, reduced time to diagnosis through shared knowledge and expertise, potentially pre-identification for participation in research studies, expedited navigation to community-provided resources and support for patients, access to educational programming, and with 40 centers across the country, many of which have satellite clinics and referral networks around them, we're aiming to meet patients closer to where they live, deliver rare disease-specific care without so much travel, as well as access to research and clinical trials. To accomplish these goals, we looked for centers that were broadly capable and had demonstrated programs specific to rare diseases. Specifically, our application process and review sought the following shared characteristics: a demonstrated commitment to rare disease patients and their families, coordinated multi-specialty care, support for the transition from pediatric to adult care. We also decided that to be designated as a NORD General Rare Disease Center of Excellence, each center should have the ability to see both children and adults, and therefore our center designations often go to both a children's hospital and an adult hospital, or sometimes to an entire academic medical center. These sites also are intentionally chosen because they are involved in the education and training of students, including the next generation of rare disease professionals, with the logic that if we refer a patient to be seen at one of the centers, not only do we want them to receive the best possible clinical care, but we'd like those interactions to help train the next generation of rare disease experts, which are in short supply. And these institutions were also chosen because they're actively contributing to rare disease research and to new models of therapy and care. The new element is really bringing these highly qualified centers together to collaborate. And it's been a real pleasure for me to see the level of enthusiasm that exists in all of our meetings and working groups and planning sessions. It's really more than I expected. This is the current list of NORD Rare Disease Centers of Excellence. I obviously won't read this. It's roughly in alphabetical order. And you'll see that sometimes the designation went to an entire academic medical center, or sometimes to the partnership between a children's hospital and an adult medical school that they worked with, medical center rather. This is a look at the distribution of the 40 centers across the United States on top of a map of the US population density, where blue are urban areas, green are moderately populated areas, and the yellow spaces are sparsely populated. As I mentioned briefly before, by their nature, these well-established academic medical centers, although we strove to find those with the necessary capabilities that were in more rural states, they all tend to have referral networks around them. A sort of famous example is the University of Washington Seattle Children's Hospital. That medical or collection of medical institutions really serves Washington, Alaska, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, without there being another major academic medical center in those areas. Other of these centers are famous for flying patients by helicopter to get them into the academic center, or closer to home in Boston. We extend, services up into some of the New England states. And you can say the same thing essentially about all of these centers. So while we might add a few more centers, the balancing concerns, we think currently we come close to providing access to expert rare disease care across the nation. To interconnect and establish a governance system for the network, we're interconnecting the network with quarterly meetings of the center directors, 3 times a year online and once in person. So far, we've held only one in-person meeting. The second in-person meeting is coming up next month in mid-October, and will be held on the campus of UT Southwestern in Dallas, one of the designated centers who've helped us to host that meeting. We aim to rotate the annual meeting around in future years. We also have monthly online meetings of 12 topic-specific working groups, as well as a monthly directors working group, which is the only working group where we stipulated that the members should probably be directors of their centers, because that's a working group that focuses on the unique challenges of trying to organize and win support for a rare disease center of excellence within a larger medical center, tackling some of the complications like reimbursement and so forth. We're also connecting the sites with an intranet-based knowledge sharing and collaboration platform, so that ideally all of the individuals interested in rare diseases at the participating centers can log in directly to find useful information, and I'll say more about that later, and also establish a direct connection to NORD and more easily be identified by other clinicians and scientists around the network who are looking for the right person to help them with a difficult clinical question, or the right person to collaborate with in a research study. We will also be beginning in this, our second year of operation, frequent collaborative case-based nationwide clinical conferences. By clinical conferences, I mean generally case-based discussions, as those are engaging and also provide an opportunity for people to seek direct help with a difficult diagnosis or a difficult treatment situation. And as much as possible, we aim to attach CME to those opportunities. Between the monthly meetings, the online case-based conferences, a little bit like national grand rounds for rare diseases, and the intranet, we're building a connected community and the enthusiasm for this level of cooperation between institutions that may have competed in the past or may compete still on some level in the future has been very high. As I mentioned, we'll also have shared resources on the internet and shared data collection resources to facilitate research and other operations, as well as cooperative agreements that will go beyond our initial membership agreement as necessary to conduct some of those operations. Kind of diagrammatically, this is the vision we have for the Centers of Excellence and how they can be coordinated, linked by an intranet, a shared collaboration platform. By the frequent meetings and case conferences, the Centers of Excellence are meant to be a rich environment for sharing of expertise, so that when a clinical best practice is developed or recognized at one site, we can readily share that across all the sites to exactly the physicians who are seeing those sorts of patients. Similarly, if there's a research study, whether it's a small scale one or a large scale one, that would benefit by being run in a multi-center fashion, we hope to reduce some of the barriers and make it easier to run multi-site research studies across the network. Early in 2022, shortly after designating the initial sites, we convened phone calls with all of the center directors and agreed on a number of key unmet needs in the rare disease space, and essentially agreed to convene a working group to tackle each of these unmet needs. We're very excited to have a large number of expert volunteers who now staff 13 working groups. Here they're grouped together sort of by their area of focus. So there are working groups where the primary focus is on care, such as a working group on treatment guideline identification and development, a working group on diagnostic approaches, including trying to improve access to testing and developing new diagnostic guidelines, and a working group, the third bullet point down in the upper left quadrant, that's got a long title. It's named Clinical Application for Newly Approved Treatments. Originally suggested by Jerry Vockley in Pittsburgh, this is a working group aimed to make sure that the members of the network can be educated about what newly approved treatments for rare diseases, including things like gene therapies, are coming online, and strive to make each of their centers ready to administer those new treatments. I won't continue to read all the working groups, but I'll point out that in this grouping of working groups related to care, working groups related to education, working groups related to research, and working groups that are going to use policy and advocacy as tools, we've partnered the working groups with professionals from NORD, such as some of NORD's professional policy staff, many of whom have been things like staffers on the Hill or FDA officers and things in the past, so that they can be embedded in some of the working group discussions and complement the scientific and medical expertise of the academic experts with their professional education or professional advocacy experience. You'll notice down at the bottom 2 working groups that are in parentheses, that these are because these are the 2 most newly added working groups. When we held our first in-person meeting in October of last year, it bubbled up from the assembled center directors that even though we are designating sites only in the United States, that in part because many of the staff of these centers are already involved in volunteer efforts or other sort of international collaborations, including in developing countries, that our experts were interested in having a sort of formal mechanism to help advance also rare diseases in other countries. And so we are now inviting and pulling new members into the International Collaboration Working Group, including members from the 9 most recently added NORD Rare Disease Centers of Excellence, which were added in May. Similarly, at that first in-person meeting, there was a call from the directors to add a working group on newborn screening, which of course would be of interest to this group. This group has had its first meeting, and it's probably this month, with the start of the new academic year, that additional members will be added from the newest of the Centers of Excellence. And so it's probably this month or next month, really, that working group will have its complete membership. As I said, the working groups have pleasantly engendered many volunteers, more than 300 volunteers. Well, most of the center directors are medical geneticists, as a sort of residual of the fact that before I joined NORD, the invitations went out kind of invitation only to the first centers and disproportionately went to medical geneticists, when really we need to serve all rare diseases. So we're very pleased that they are nevertheless successful in reaching out to their colleagues in other departments across the medical center. Which reminds me to mention something that's come up over and over again. Many of these large academic medical centers are learning about themselves through this process. So, for example, our application to become a NORD Rare Disease Center of Excellence had more than 120 questions, which were very wide-ranging. And I was told by the group that put together an application from the Mayo Clinic that they ended up calling something like 30 different Mayo Clinic department chairs and asking them, what do you all do with rare diseases? Which rare diseases do you see? And making, at least as far as they knew, for the first time, a list of what was being done for rare diseases across the Mayo Clinic apparatus. Similarly, our members are discovering, collaborators or like-minded individuals and departments within their own institutions, as well as across institutional boundaries, because of this convening of physicians and researchers who are specifically interested in rare diseases. So the working groups now have specialists from both pediatric and adult medicine across a variety of specialties, and also a variety of professionals, including nurses, pharmacists, social workers, dietitians, research project coordinators, and others. We will be adding at least one more working group. We've consciously waited on convening in order to see some of the rest of this structure come together first, which is a working group of patients and patient advocates who will be able to suggest projects, and will also be a sounding board, probably with rotating membership across many different rare diseases, to make sure that our efforts remain tied to the patient's interests. From a patient perspective, we expect that the Centers of Excellence will deliver on sharing of expert rare disease knowledge so that patients and caregivers will have to travel less to receive optimal care. I think we've probably all known patients and families who felt like maybe they had to travel 2,000 miles to see someone who discovered the gene that causes their problem. But do they really need to do that if that person is sharing their expertise with similarly skilled clinicians closer to home? That's kind of the vision here. That we will be advocating for equity and access to diagnosis and care, and ensuring that every rare disease patient feels welcome at any one of the Centers of Excellence. Though we hope that going to the one closest to their home would make the most sense in most cases. Increasing rare disease research so that more rare disease patients have opportunities to enroll in clinical trials, and spearheading efforts to increase the number of rare disease specialists in the next generation so that there will be more doctors who are focused on these rare conditions. We've divided the activities into 4 main pillars: accelerating diagnosis, improving access to the best available care, including making all the available treatment guidelines and diagnostic guidelines and things more readily accessible when they're needed, accelerating the sort of foundational rare disease research that's often done by academics, such as disease discovery, pathogenesis, natural history studies, validating biomarkers, exploring outcome measures, and oftentimes some stages of drug development, but also in the fourth pillar, facilitating therapy development, which often requires involvement of industry. And across all four pillars of activity, ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion is remembered and actively pursued. Pursuing all four simultaneously, we believe, is the right way to improve overall patient health and quality of life for rare disease patients. Since, for example, you can't really enroll clinical trials if you're not diagnosing patients effectively. And so it's really a synergistic set of goals. I'll speak about each of the four main pillars briefly, and none of these lists are exhaustive, and they're still being informed in part by the gatherings of the center directors and the working groups, aided by features like the intranet that will enable sharing of information more easily between the sites. We will develop and disseminate existing diagnostic protocols, facilitate inter-site consultation so that to some extent the knowledge can travel across the country instead of the patients, increase diagnostic expertise amongst physicians nationwide, including those outside of the centers of excellence and their referral networks through educational efforts, improve equitable access to patient access into diagnostic tools and testing services by a variety of methods, reduce referral times, and leverage telehealth consultations to expedite diagnosis and care. The impact, we hope, is that more patients will be identified earlier to optimize outcome. In terms of patient care, we will strive to improve patient access to care and to treatment, to improve care coordination between specialists, both within their own institution and across institutions to share expertise, develop and disseminate clinical care guidelines. These will be distributed internally through the intranet, and vetted guidelines will also be shared publicly on NORD's website. We also strive, pending fundraising efforts that are underway now, to establish patient navigation programs to coordinate care of rare disease patients in and around each center, and to track the quality metrics that we really need to identify gaps in care and motivate real continuous quality improvement. Impact here should be that patients start on the appropriate therapy and have better access to it. In terms of foundational research that we expect to be performed at academic centers such as these, we're putting in place network-wide collaboration agreements with a goal in particular to make it easier to do more and affordably priced natural history studies for the hundreds of, if not thousands of diseases where the natural history is still unclear, biomarker studies, and other efforts that ultimately make a disease, more ready for therapy development. And in all these efforts, we will leverage the existing expert labs and core facilities across the network, basically matching existing facilities to the appropriate, projects and facilitating collaboration. The impact here should be that more diseases are made ready for clinical development. To facilitate therapy development, using our relationships with the centers of excellence, we aim to be able to accelerate study enrollment by finding the right investigators and eligible patients more quickly, and reducing the costs and startup times for clinical studies, and optimize the nationwide outreach to underrepresented populations. One of the very interesting parts of reading the applications that we received was that the predominant minorities or the largest underserved populations are different in different places across the country. And since we asked application questions about what your center did to reach out to rare disease patients in underserved communities, we got a variety of answers. Some held rotating clinics, sometimes flying doctors by airplane to Native American Indian reservations. Others were focused on trying to reach out to Latino populations with Spanish language materials and other features. But in the context of research and therapy development, it's both ethically and scientifically desirable to capture the diversity and engage patients equitably across the network. And we hope that we can achieve some of that. The impact of this general category would be that more therapies are developed for that 95% of rare diseases that don't have an FDA-approved treatment. The next several slides were prepared by a genetic counselor, Mary Beth McAfee, who works at NORD and serves as director of our medical affairs efforts, including helping me to coordinate the Rare Disease Center of Excellence Network. And these slides have the benefit of being prepared by Mary Beth, who's expert in their content, but they're a few months old. So some of the things that she speaks about in the future tense of we will do, we've already done. And I'll try to point out some of that. But this section describes the intranet knowledge sharing platform that is available all the time to the clinicians and researchers at the Centers of Excellence, as opposed to, of course, an annual meeting, which only happens once a year. So the intranet is meant to facilitate collaborations and to reduce the burden of finding rare disease information, practice resources, educational materials, etc., by having them all in one place. We really don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So for example, if at one of the centers, a Spanish language information booklet has been made to explain a particular condition or something like that, we can so easily share it with all the centers, but that's not happening today. A key foundational element of the intranet that will facilitate this is that we've built it around a hierarchical classification of rare diseases. We've literally manually gone through more than 13,000 rare diseases, identified 10,000 that seem to be, discrete, reported more than once entities, and they're hierarchically classified. So if we can't find information or an expert for a particular XYZ condition, the idea is that in the neighboring items in the hierarchy, we can find the most closely related set of experts or information. Who will have access to the intranet? Well, all of the faculty and staff at the Centers of Excellence who are legitimate medical professionals and through their institution, request access because they're interested in rare diseases. The goal will be to facilitate intersite consultations so the knowledge travels rather than the patients, to aid in triaging patients to shorten the diagnostic journey and provide more coordinated care, to increase collaborations between clinicians and researchers throughout the system. To do so, each individual, which we expect to number in the thousands, affiliated with the Centers of Excellence, will have a profile, and each center will have a profile. The center profiles will include listings of other special programs available at each center, such as UDN sites, RDCRN consortia. Again, we don't mean to compete with anything that already exists, but rather, advertise and amplify, what those programs are doing, making them that much easier to find. Individual profiles will include one's area of specialization, the option to upload a biosketch, names under which they have published, and information about their involvement, including whether they're involved in laboratory research or clinical care, whether they run clinical trials, whether they advise a patient organization or a professional society, and also what specific areas or diseases they are most interested in and would willingly serve as advisors on. In order to facilitate collaboration, it will be easier through the intranet to find people with common interests. In part, one can go to the structured disease list and see which experts in the network have identified themselves as being interested, or we can run searches as necessary. The goal here is to reduce the clinician burden. We essentially don't want people to have to do a PubMed search every time they see something that they're unfamiliar with. If the experts in the network have already sort of crowdsourced a disease page where useful information about that disease is recorded. And again, the best vetted of this information we aim to mirror externally on NORD's websites for the outside world, but in the sheltered confines of the password-protected intranet connecting the sites, things can be developed. A draft treatment protocol can receive comments. Lists of useful articles can be cited, and so forth. The disease list, which is being co-developed by NORD and Mondo and OMIM, and with collaborations also from Orphanet, will link out to all the other relevant identifiers, including billing codes where those exist. And the internet will pull together disease resources, ultimately on sort of disease-specific pages, to make it easy to find published diagnostic guidelines, treatment guidelines, and again, within the confines of the intranet, potentially new materials being developed. And it will be made easier to find research studies related to specific diseases or topics, or collaborators to work on research projects with. Views of the network and updates from the working group also have a home on the intranet, and the intranet will also be the mechanism by which we provide shared, live streamed and video recorded case conferences, again, as sort of national grand rounds for rare diseases, probably having at least 5 different streams to reflect different areas of interest. Thank you, and look forward to discussion with this group. It's a pleasure to have been invited to speak with you.